I didn't
Maybe
see
sit in
much.
here.
Still more people?
I might.
No, come up and sit wherever, just move my keys, and that's absolutely fine. There's one person that I don't know where he is, that I.
Does he
you
know
might
it's
not-
here?
I don't think he knows where this
Because I
building
didn't know it was
is.
here. He might activate it.
Yeah, it was in the post.
I didn't see it post.
That's right, you don't check Facebook.
I think
They're too young, we're the old people who use
Right, we
Facebook.
go out
Very
to Facebook,
true.
haven't we?
They don't use Facebook. So, yeah, I don't know, and I'm checking my email
I
to
don't think
see
he
if
knows where this building is.
he emails me and asks where we are.
Are you guys doing the poll?
I might.
So this is Chris Stevens,
Hey everyone!
and most of this group is in our Music of World Cultures course.
Very cool.
And we
Sounds
just-
like a good class.
Finished, we tried, don't we? We just finished the units over the eastern part of the world, Asia
Okay.
and Middle East, and
So that's where all of my instruments are from, the continent of Asia, which, in Western languages, Asia usually just means China, Korea, Japan. But Asia starts in Egypt and goes all the way to Japan. So this instrument here is called an oud, which is like a lute. So the word lute and oud are related. Lute is kind of an Romanized version of the Arabic word oud, which means wood. And this instrument here is called tar, T-A-R. It's from Persia, so the modern country of Iran, Azerbaijan, surrounding countries. And the word tar, you can tell like guitar, so that's a Persian word, like gut strings basically. So the word tar means string in the Persian language. So that's basically just a stringed instrument. This is called sitar, obviously, so the tar comes from the Persian language as well. The prefix sit means 6, so it has 6 strings on top, or it did in the 1700s when it was invented. Now it has 20, so they've upgraded a bit. And this instrument is from China, China proper, mainland China. It's called pipa. Pipa is, it means up, down in China, so pi, up, down, up. That's how you play the strings with these picks on your fingers, so it's different from like a banjo or finger pick style guitar where you go in, you put the picks on this side of your finger and go in. You actually put them over your nails, so they're fake nails, and you flick out like this. So the name sort of tells you how you play it. So have you guys heard of any of these in your class? Which ones? All of them?
you better say yes.
Yeah. So there's lots of history with these instruments. I think that the oud probably has the most, as far as number of years it's existed in its current form. It probably has around 3,000 years. You can see a glyph, an ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic pyramid style of writing. There's a glyph for the oud. So it was around back in pyramid times, very old. It's made out of very soft wood, so it's very light. It weighs maybe 2 pounds. In fact, most of the weight actually comes from these ebony pegs, so it's very top heavy. The shape here, this bowl shape, these little strips of soft wood that are heated. So there's a mold that sort of looks like this, and they have a hot rod of metal that they press the wood against, and it bends the wood while it's wet, and then they let it cool in that mold and glue it together so it gets that shape. That's apparently easier than carving it out. I don't know, but it seems not as easy to do that. But I've seen them make it, and yeah, you just cut these little strips, and they're flat, so then you soak them in water so they're saturated with water, and then you press them against the steam from this rod, and it can bend it without breaking it. And then you glue it all together, and it apparently has worked for a long time like that. It seems like the first instrument would have been easier to make, but apparently that's not. I had a lot of free time back then, I guess. And the pegs are slanted as such so that this pressure right here keeps the wood from bending. Modern guitars, lutes, they have a truss rod, which is a metal bar that keeps the pressure of the strings from eventually, because this is a lot of, pounds per square inch, just pulling constantly, and so the natural tendency of the wood is to curve this way, to give the strings just constantly pressing on it. It just breaks eventually, but this bent headstock prevents that. So, little ingenuity from our ancient Egyptian brethren. The face plate here is made of soft Lebanese cedar. It's very resonant, and it's played with this sort of pick, which traditionally was made of an eagle quill, but now is nylon since about 1930 or 40 or so, when nylon was invented. A lot of strings switched from using gut, like a guitar, like a Spanish guitar. Used to be made of gut as well. Now it uses nylon. So these are nylon strings, and these are copper wound. So they're double coursed, so two strings tuned to the same note. They're tuned as close to the same note as the human ear can detect, I'll say that. So it doubles the volume essentially when there's double coursed strings, and just due to the nature of the ability to tune a string, they're not, if you would play them separately, there's 10 decimal places off of a difference, but that gives it a sort of resonant quality, and it vibrates the bridge here, which vibrates the plate, which sends, that's why instruments have these hollow bodies, is because it amplifies sound and resonates. And the double course is, it's also easier to play like that. If it was just a single course, there's not as much room to place a finger. So this is the way that I usually tune it, is holding it like this. You can tell that's an octave if you guys know music. So there we go. This isn't standard Arabic tuning that I use. It's Iraqi tuning, which Iraq is sort of has a close tied relationship with Persia, and Persian music is fully modal, meaning that it has a drone. You've heard the word drone, which means that it's just a constant note, an open string that plays nonstop throughout the whole performance, which the tar and the sitar and the pipa all have. But the oud in standard Arabic is tuned to modulate between lots of keys. So you'll have an F string, an A string, a D, C, E, G. So you'll have all these different open strings so you can sort of modulate between your drones. The way I tune mine, it's sort of inspired by an Iraqi player who I find very fascinating, who tuned it sort of to open G, open C. So you can tell that when you have double course strings like that, it's just, you just have to give up on it after a point. You just can't get them perfectly in tune. Just to the point that you can't notice anymore is when I say it's in tune. This room sounds good too. So that's the oud. Oud, O-U-D in English. It has its own way of spelling it in Arabic. And you play with this flat, it's called a rishi, R-I-S-H-I. Their system of music, so that's sort of the introduction to the instrument itself. Soft wood, heated on a bowl, pegs, engineering stuff. Fretless, like a violin or a cello. So there's microtones in really all Eastern music. Notes that you wouldn't be able to play on a piano per se, but you could play them on a violin or any other fretless instrument. So their scale, we know our scale. Major scale, white keys on a piano. There's what they call half flats, and double sharps. So that would be like, we have C, D, E, which is like Mary Had a Little Lamb or something. Right? But you also have a minor, which would be like, you know, the Carol of the Bells or something. There's a E half flat. There's several scales that use a half flat. So E major, E minor, E half flat would be was halfway between those notes. So it sort of sounds out of tune to our ears because, you know, it's like having a word that doesn't have a definition in your language almost. If you think about it, you know, like major is happy, minor is sad, half flat is uncharted territory. We don't know how to feel about that. Until you start to get into it, you realize that it's just like a new emotion halfway between happy and sad. But that's the reason that their instruments are fretless, so you can play those half notes. If you can tell on the tar, there's lots of frets. So this is tuned to a piano chromatic tuning. The tar has, like, there would be a fret here in between. So it actually has its frets tuned to these same microtones that are played on this fretless instrument. So there's half flats and double sharps on the tar as well. The pipa and the sitar, their microtones are more like glissando. You know these terms, like if you've heard classical music. So a glissando is like a vibration, like a vocal, or like a vibrato, like a blues, like a rare or something. You don't actually focus on those notes. They're grace notes or ghost notes. So they're just sort of played as a way to give us a melody, texture, and substance, and nuance, I guess. These are the words. So, but Arabic and Persian music, they use them as if they were notes in the scale. And the scales themselves are called maqam, M-A-Q-A-M, which I think in Arabic is translated into English as order or like classification. So there's hundreds of maqam. These are melodic frameworks that the player can improvise upon, and there's compositions that are handed down from teachers to students, usually through family or extended family. And there's ways of modulating between maqams to sort of change the mood or the style of the piece that you're playing. So one that pretty much embodies the Middle East is called Hijaz. Hijaz is also a region in Saudi Arabia where Mecca and Medina are. So these very, very prominent Islamic places. This is the name of the scale that corresponds with that place. So that's a it pretty much is synonymous with Eastern culture in general. Russian klezmer music too uses this scale a lot. So that's your tonic, your drone, flat second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, flat sixth, flat seventh, octave. So Persian music, their flat second is actually one of those double flats, so it's. But here's the actual half flat. From the Arabic world. It's been turned into Jewish songs, Russian songs, you know, all sorts of Eastern sounding music uses that scale. You can pretty much pinpoint that particular. It's this sort of phrase here. So that sort of phrase framework right there is a dead giveaway that they're trying to evoke the Old East. There's different versions of Hijaz that use a natural seventh. So the way that I'm playing the oud now is very modal. So you're playing the same note and sort of basing your melodic framework on the relationships that these notes have with that tonic. So. This is an improvisational way of playing called taksim, which usually, in a performance of classical Arabic music, they usually start with this taksim, where the oud player, or really whatever instrument, just sort of sets the mood of the piece, sort of shows off a bit, and gets the audience, impressed. And it sort of is telling the audience and sort of displaying what sort of style that they play, and there's many different ways of playing the oud. This instrument is found pretty much everywhere from Morocco to Iran to Greece and Sudan. So it has a huge spread. It's found everywhere. So there's many different styles of playing. The North African style is very different. It's more rhythmic. The Sudanese sort of or East African way of playing is more pentatonic. Goes with African music a little bit better to go along with like marimbas and very simple music like that. Greece and Turkey has a different way of playing, just a different approach to these techniques. And Persia, Iran, and Iraq have a different way of playing too. So there's standard Arabic, which is the most common way that oud is played. And I sort of play in the Eastern Arabic / Persian way. Just because it sort of fits with the other style of these instruments that I'm interested in, and that it's very subtle. There's lots of space and lots of improvisation. Standard Arabic oud is very composed. You sort of play by the books. You play what your teacher taught you, and you play the compositions. And not to say that there's no freedom, because you are also allowed to improvise, but that's just a portion of it. Whereas Persian, Iraqi oud playing is very much, you're just sort of given this space to chill, which I like. I like chill. So I'll play a little bit of the oud, and then I'll move on to somewhere else. So I'll try to play a few different maqam, which are modulated together. You change one note, so if you play one maqam and you change one note, that turns it into another one. And there's a whole endless world of how you can do that, and in the moment you're just sort of free-forming these patterns, interweaving these melodies together, and trying to play a maqam, play a transitional piece that turns into another maqam, and so it requires a lot of attention within that freedom to improvise. So I'll play a few different maqam and maybe see how many I can do before I realize I failed. That was about. There's about 5 different macams in there, so there's. So these different scales sort of fit together. Just if you have them all memorized, you can sort of play math in your head and string them together in different ways by deciding which note you're going to change, and one will lead to the next. So there's Vayati, which is basically our equivalent of like a minor scale. So except for the second is half flat. So that's like a weird note. But if you change the 7th, you turn it into a Nahawand. And if you change the 3rd, you turn it into basically our major scale. And you can just sort of play around with these sort of modulations of changing one note, and you can't really explain how it happens. You're just improvising. So you're just playing something, and then you realize enough time has passed, I need to change one note. I'll change a random note, and it's just if you asked me in the moment what I'm playing, I probably wouldn't be able to answer you. So that's a brief introduction to Arabic classical music through the oud. Very old instrument with lots of intricacies and history behind it. So Arabic music is, of course, very closely related, as is all of Arabic culture, to Persian culture, since they're really right next to each other. So this music is going to be different, but somehow also not different. Does that sound right to you guys? Okay, so this instrument is called tar, T-A-R, in Persian. So the word tar just means stringed instrument, basically. And there's guitar, sitar, dotar, many different forms of tar around the world, but they all use that suffix because of the Persian language and its influence on whatever culture it is. So Spanish had it through Arabic, through Persian. That's why they call it like guitar that we know, because Persian culture sort of used that suffix to indicate, hey, this is a stringed instrument. You should make that sound for it. So the instrument itself is carved out of the body is carved out of a piece of mulberry wood. So this is like the inside of a trunk of a very big old mulberry tree that's dried for, I don't know, 20-something years. And then carved into this shape. So there's an indentation here, and it's given this rounded shape, this double-chambered bubble. I don't even know what shape to call it, but it's weird looking. And then it's cut in half and hollowed out, so you can see that it has this very differently lined up seam where it's just it wasn't carved at the same depth. I mean, they're all like that. That's not an imperfection. That's just the way it is. But you can tell that this was once one solid chunk that got cut in half, grinded down, and glued back together. So the lines in mulberry wood sort of reflect the topography, really, of the wood. So this looks like a mountain peak. The neck here is attached inside, so there's no truss rod in here either, but it doesn't have as many strings, and there's not as much pressure. And it's also longer, and it uses these white strips of camel bone. This is a femur of an adult camel, so that keeps everything from sort of bending this way. And these frets are made of sinew, so it's intestine, pretty much dried intestine. The peg box here is a separately carved piece that fits into it. So all of these materials that are used to make this instrument are fully native to Iran. They can be found around there. This is leather. This is, from a cow. This is water buffalo horn, which apparently they live there. I wouldn't have guessed that, but they do. Another piece of camel bone. This skin, this might freak you out. This skin is the skin of a stillborn sheep skin. So unborn fetal sheep skin. I don't know how they decided on that to be their choice of material, but that's what it's been for a long time. It's not something that we would usually think of making instruments out of stillborn sheep, but when you're looking for a material that vibrates, something that is also strong but also responds to resonance, and apparently that's what nature has made to do that. We've since invented nylon again, which like the banjo uses, but they're like, no, we'll stay with our fetal sheepskin. But it's very, it sort of does give it a unique sort of style, and it's very thin, and it's responsive to basically any sort of touch. You can tell that it's just vibrating away and just sort of hanging on. So it's glued on here with honey around the edge, and then sort of dampened so it's tight. The pick here is called mizrab, which is also the name of the sitar pick. But it's a bullet-shaped piece of copper with a beeswax coating. So after time, this gets heated up from being in contact with your skin, and sort of gets sticky and nice, and it stays put. Right now it's kind of cold from being unplayed, but after 10 minutes or so, it'll warm up and it'll stick to your finger, so it doesn't fly away when you're playing. The strings are also double coursed like the oud, so same 2 notes. These are tuned an octave apart. So this is tuned just open C, G, C. There's different ways of tuning. You can tune these strings up to D. You can sort of play around with the tuning more. The oud And the pipa and the sitar, you really don't change the main playing strings tunings. You just sort of leave them. Guitar, you can change the playing strings. So the frets, like I said, they line up with the microtonal intervals that you can play on a fretless instrument. So you can tell that there's this fret here, here, here. These are frets that you wouldn't find on a guitar or a bass or any other fretted instrument, in our world anyway. So these are half flats and double sharp. So these notes don't really harmonize as you would think of harmony. You won't find that note on a harmonic anywhere. It's just, you know, that's just their system that they have. I don't know how to explain it. It's just. So they're fully part of the scale. They're not just grace notes or subtle little touches that the player adds. They're fully part of whatever you're playing. So they have a system similar to Makam called Dustgap, which is a melodic framework that you improvise upon, basically. Same exact concept. Different scales. Some of them are the same, some of them do line up. But most of them are just fully native to Persian classical music. And you don't really modulate between them during a performance either. You stick with one. So you'll decide, you know, which one you're going to play. It's usually whichever one your teacher has taught you. I'm sort of coming at this from, if I can go personal for a second. I've never had a teacher teach me any of these things. So I've listened to recordings, watched videos. I have friends in town who play these instruments that are from overseas, and I've just sort of picked this all up from an outsider. So if I had a teacher, I would, you know, play in the way that my teacher taught me, and that would be that. But there's many different ways of playing, so I have many different ways of playing based on, you know, people that I've listened to, and inevitably the style that I've played from one instrument bleeds into the other. So I'm sort of coming at this from an outsider, basically, and usually they'll play everything according to how they were taught, you know, but I was never taught, so I play things even more improvised than those who have been taught to improvise. And, you know, I was talking with my friend about this whole subject in general, if I can go on a rant, about improvisation just sort of as a thing, and how it's sort of related to speech and talking, and, you know, how in our musical heritage, everything is scored out, and not to say that these aren't too, there's plenty of written compositions for all these instruments, but, you know, we just sort of came to the conclusion that playing classical music and reciting a pre-composed thing is like reciting poetry, which is great. You know, poetry is beautiful, but improvising is more like speaking, true, authentic, actual conversation. And you don't know what you're going to say next. You have ideas. You try to say interesting things. You try to engage your audience, but it really just comes down to whether or not your head is full of interesting things or not. You know, you could be a very boring person and read someone else's poetry and it would be acceptable, but probably not if you were an improviser. It would be boring improvisation. And so that's sort of my behind-the-scenes philosophy about this, is that it just seems more authentically human and open to more connection and possibilities to improvise. And that's how I've learned these, because it's based on improvisation. So you can listen to it, and you might not be able to know what's going on at first, but if you keep listening, you know, if you would listen to the same recording in Mandarin or something, you would eventually be able to speak in a Mandarin style accent, almost, you know. You might not be able to be fluent in the language, but you could get the vibe of it, and I think that's the main takeaway is that music is a vibe machine. And when you learn the vibe, you know, you can replicate the vibe. So that's sort of how I approach this sort of style of music. So the Dustka system that's D-A-S-G-A-H, Dustka, of Persian classical music is, like I said, similar to maqams of the Arabic music, and also similar to the raga music of the sitar, in that it's a modal, so these strings are sort of the drone, and this is your main playing string, so everything you play is sort of based on relation to that drone, so perfect fifth and tonic, minor third, so everything that you play is sort of, they don't have a sort of like a, what's it called, harmony, I guess, where you would play in one chord and that would move to another, and it's all one chord. You would never change. You would never be able to change even if you wanted to. So it's very simple in the fact that you don't have to worry about what key you're in. As long as you're in tune, you're in the key, the only key that exists. So all of the focus of all of the mental attention goes to interesting and flowing melodic and rhythmic patterns, and piecing together patterns to make some sort of complete finished product after, you know, however long your time slot is. So, with that, I'll play the tar, some Persian classical inspired music. And I say inspired because I've never had a teacher, so I can't really say, I'm not a Persian, obviously. And so, you know, I feel like it's just inspired by it. It's not the actual real thing, because the real thing, they have a teacher, they have words for all these things, they have everything written out. And this is sort of my interpretation, I guess, of that, just from listening to it for years and years and years and practicing every day for years and years and years. It sort of is an interpretation of it. So this is a Dustka that is called Shor, which uses S-H-O-O-R, Shor. So that's like tonic, half flat second, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, half flat sixth, flat seventh octave. So. There's a lot you can do with that, you know, when you are just playing the drones, it's pretty much all set out, but the more you focus on a certain note, the more it sort of sounds like the drone, sounds like the tonic, so you can play around with that and get different sort of modes. lots of rhythmic variations. You can do lots of very interesting sort of accidental sounding patterns with this Mizrab. Hold it very loosely so that you can sort of almost lose control and play lots of small, repetitive, looping theme and variation style pickings. So. If you're practicing enough, you can get sort of an infinite number of variations on a single thing. You can only play a few notes, but play it lots of different ways. So I'll play a different one now. This one is something about Persian classical music is that there's Daska and there's systems underneath. So I played Shor just now. Underneath that there are sub sort of melodies that belong to that family. It's sort of like a bracket where it's like one belongs to a subset of the other, and uses a different note that makes it sort of stand out but still belong to that class of melody. So this one's called Dashti. So it uses the same notes, but it adds in the natural second, which sort of sounds familiar to us as a perfect fifth. There's usually a drum that plays with it called tombek, which is like a goblet-shaped drum that you play like this. And the performance usually modulates between solo tar and a duet with the drum. So there's different sections that sound really fast, like it needs a drummer with me, and other sections where it sounds like I'm just sort of pontificating on this melody. So I usually have a drummer, but he wasn't able to make it. So that's sort of Persian classical music in a nutshell. And that leads us into the sitar, which Persian music is to Arabic music as Indian music is to Persian music. So they're intrinsically neighbors who are related, who share their culture, and influence each other's music. At least in North India, sort of South India has its own thing going on, which I know very little about. But North Indian music, or Hindustani music, even though, you know, you can tell the prefix, or the suffix stan, like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, whatever, those are all Persian suffixes. So, this is the sitar, which has sort of had its go around in our world in the 60s through the Beatles, Ravi Shankar, Rolling Stones, that whole thing. But it's actually a classical instrument, so it's it somehow got tied in with that world, and it sort of belonged in a more sort of prestigious setting. This is like a classical instrument as we know it in our world, so like a harpsichord or something. It'd be like if hippies loved harpsichord, which, you know, maybe you do. But it's similar to the tar in that it has strings that are played open that don't change. They're so about the construction of the actual instrument, you can tell it's a very complex, intricate piece of work here. So mine is in rough shape back here. So this is a pumpkin, basically a dried gourd. So there's a type of gourd that grows around the area of Goa and Mumbai that is used to make these instruments. So the manufacturer of these sort of gourds, pumpkins, will dig a hole in the ground, you know, next to the river, and, you know, plant the seed of the gourd, and it grows to fill the shape of that hole that it's in. So it's sort of molded in the way that it grows, and it's dried for many years until it's basically a wood, even though, you know, gourds are kind of soft. But after it's dried, it becomes this sort of wood, very resonant, very thin, very lightweight texture. So you can tell it's got pumpkin seeds in it. That's just the way it is. They leave them in there. The whole instrument is hollow, so you can tell. So there's basically here, there's 3 different ways of creating a hollow-bodied instrument. You've got the bending of the wood when it's wet over steam. You've got carving it out, which is really intense, or you've got growing a gourd and then putting wood on top of it. Pretty cool, pretty unique way of getting around a problem, which is that, you know, hollow spaces hold air. Sound is vibration of air. So you need your instruments to have a way of holding a structure that contains air in it. So those are the 3 ways that they do that. So Indian music has sort of taken the modal improvisation idea to the absolute extreme. These strings are all tuned in a 1/5 tuning, so CG in this case. You can tune it to 1/4. It's also, you know, sounds harmonious to us. And these strings are never really changed, so they play throughout the whole duration of the performance. They use this bridge here that you can tell is very long. All these other strings just sort of exit their bridge and don't really interact with anything else. They just sort of come off and they go free. These interact with this bridge here, which you can tell is very long this way, which is an unusual feature to have for a bridge. That's why each string, the note lasts a very long time and it buzzes like that. If that bridge wasn't there, it would just sound like any other string. But since it's curved here at an angle, this is camel bone again. So the sitar actually takes a lot of maintenance to keep it sounding nice after you play it on it for a while. So this bridge here, when the string vibrates, it's actually bouncing up and down here. If you had like an electron microscope or something, you could see that it's like wiggling, basically hitting on this at an angle. So it's a slight parabola where the string goes, it wants to go straight from the tension, but it's has to deal with the fact that this bridge is holding it up, so it slaps against it basically and makes that buzzing sound. Eventually, over months, years, it wears away at the material since it's camel bone. It's just, calcium. So the string sort of wears little grooves in it, and you have to recarve it. It's such a chore. But that's sort of how it gets that sound. So that sort of angle, the sloped angle downward, sort of gives it that characteristic buzz sound. And you can tell here that there's all this free space here between the string and the side of the fret. So that's so that you can bend. So that's how they get their microtones. Each instrument has its own way of getting its microtones, which are an essential element of any Oriental classical music style. You wouldn't play a makam, a dustka, a raga, or anything on a piano. It wouldn't be possible. You need microtones in order to play it properly. So you can either go fretless and just hope for the best that you're good enough to remember where to put your fingers, or you can put frets on the microtones themselves and get it right every time, which is nice. Or you can just tune to the natural harmonic scale, chromatic, and give yourself a lot of room to bend. Those are sort of the three ways of getting microtones. This does the same thing as the sitar, where you have lots of fret room to bend. These strings can't bend at all, so if you did, it would either snap or go out of tune, or something bad would happen if you tried to bend it. But the sitar was made to be, the strings were made to be bent. It takes a lot of pain and practice to get used to that, because you're basically dealing with muscle memory. You can't see where your fingers are producing the note. So even with a fretless instrument, you can look and see, oh, my finger's here, so that's why it's sounding like that. But this, you're pulling it like down toward the floor. So there's millimeter differences between like the natural seventh and the tonic. I'm moving the string like this much to get those different notes. So there's a ton of room for error in the sitar. You can usually bend the string to a perfect fifth of whatever fret you're on. So G, C, A, D, B flat, E flat, C, G again. So it won't break, it's steel, it's meant for that. These beads here are meant for micro tuning, so if you do get a little bit out of tune, you can just push the swan back a bit and it's back in tune. Same up here, these beads, so you don't have to mess with pegs. You get the peg very much in tune as much as you can. You can adjust the bead if it gets out of tune, basically is how it works. Which is very handy, because if you have to stop and deal with pegs while you're playing, you might as well just, stop, because it's going to be a pain. All these pegs, are friction pegs, so it's soft wood inside hardwood, so it's just, and it's coated in rosin. The rosin that that weightlifters use on their hands to hold up weights. Same material. I think it's just calcium carbonate, and it's very sticky, but it also holds it in place, and you can still turn it if you need to. So they coat the pegs in that and just shove it in there as hard as they can, and you know, these strings you don't really bend. Those are just always playing in the background. And that brings me to the next set of strings. So those are the top strings, basically. You can tell there's two bridges here. You can tell there's all these pegs here. So these big lotus pegs here go to the top strings here. These little pegs go to underneath the strings. That's the bottom set of resonant sympathetic strings, which sort of vibrate on their own. So you tune these notes down the scale. So, wait, that's not ringing. These things are a pain. There. So you tune these sympathetic resonant strings to the notes that you're going to play. So you wouldn't play any notes that aren't tuned to these pegs. That sort of gives you a framework of what you can improvise within. That's called a raga, R-A-G-A. Similar to, again, a makam daska, it's an improvised melodic framework of notes that you can sort of just build upon and flow with, you know. It just sort of gives you some constraint as to, you know, you wouldn't want to just improvise in the 12-tone chromatic scale. You want to exclude at least two notes so that you're playing in a recognizable raga. There are ragas that use all 12 notes. There's only two, and you use them very subtly. You don't actually play them all. So that's a different tangent. But usually they're tuned. There's 7 notes. So that's. I can move my frets here. Oh yeah, the frets move too. Just to let you know. So there's 13 strings under there and 7 on top, so that's 20. Some have more, some have less. Just depends on who made it. So, like I said, these strings are tuned to frets here. Frets within a given raga. So they sort of resonate whenever you play a note. I can do this. There we go. Tune a sitar, you need to first tune the open strings, then tune the pegs, or then tune the frets. Since the frets move, they're just tied on with thread here, so you can adjust them if you need to. Then you tune the sympathetic strings. So it's really a complicated process to tune a sitar, but once you get it, it's pretty much stays, because these friction pegs are actually pretty reliable to stay in tune. And again, this sympathetic bridge down here is wide, just like this one, made of camel bone. It's carved at a downward parabola so that the strings vibrate on it. And each note gets some added sustain. You can tell that buzz, that sort of swell. So if it didn't have that, it would just be a flat note and it would taper off quietly at the end. But it gets louder in the middle, actually, because of that parabola. So, onto the music theory part of it. A raga is, like I said, a melodic framework that you improvise upon, but it's got a way of playing it that is more established than these. So with these, you're just sort of You have a drummer with you, and you improvise a bit. You play together, take a break, improvise a bit. This has a sort of flow, a sort of rhythmic cycle that is used in Indian classical music. So it starts very slowly, where you're playing just it's rhythmless, it's pure melodic, just, pontificating, I guess. You're just sort of establishing which notes you're playing, showing which style you play in, and giving, nuance to each note and showing how the notes fit together, and playing very slowly and sort of in a relaxed, unmetered way. That's called alap, A-L-A-P. That's sort of in a lot. You just sort of, you stay in one's place, you move to here, you just sort of establish which notes you're playing. There's another form of alap which sort of takes that to the extreme, and you can sometimes play for an hour, without any rhythm. And there's a form of Indian classical music that's very old called Dhrupad, which they have a different instrument that they play called a veena. It's very big. If I were to play it, it would be way out here. My hands would be up here, and it's meant to play a lot. So you play this very low octave way, which I'll try to demonstrate on this guitar here. So that would be like a Dhrupad alap. You're playing very low and slow and deep. No rhythm to speak of at all. You're just spelling out which notes you're playing and sort of moving from one section of the octave to the next. And then the next section of a raga is called jor, which means rhythm. So you're playing it with a little bit of a pulse. So that's sort of a jor. You're playing the same sort of style, but you have a pulse. You have a rhythmic beat. There's no cycle. You're not counting or anything. You're just sort of using these drone strings, these rhythm drone strings, to sort of add a more rhythmic way of playing. The final section of the introduction, whenever there's a classical performance, is called jala, which is very fast sort of thing, which is sort of builds upon the jor and turns it into a fireworks display, basically. So that's sort of a jala. You're playing just faster rhythm, more variation on the these strings are called chicory. And you sort of play them throughout the whole duration, but when you're playing rhythmically, you really pound them in, you know. And so then, you know, the sitar player or whatever instrument will sort of end on a big crescendo that's like, look, I'm done. I've spelled out all of these different melodic and rhythmic sections and I've exploded. So then the drums, the tabla will kick in and you'll play a sort of composed section that will have a fixed number of beats that repeats. So Indian classical music rhythm is based on repetitive cycles. So you'll have a 16-beat cycle or a 9-beat cycle, whatever. They each have a different name. You'll play 9 beats and then it repeats. And the whole goal is to play with sort of time and make it seem like the rhythmic cycle is different. And then land on one and fool everybody, and they're all like, wow, I thought it was a different beat. But they landed on one, so it must have not been. And so I'll play a little something like that. It's a shame I don't have a tabla player. But I'll count along, so this is probably the most common rhythmic cycle. Tala is the name of a rhythmic cycle in Hindi. So it's called teen tal, which really equates to our world as 4/4 timing. So every song you've ever heard, basically. So that'd be 1, 2, 3. So you would play like 1, you know, you would be able to feel that with the drum that it's 1 and it repeats. And you can play with the number of beats in between 1 and 16 and, you know, make it seem like it's a different number. So that's a repetition of 3 like that is called a T-high, which is how you end a rhythmic cycle and let them know that you're going to 1, you're going to repeat again. So you play something that seems out of time, and you repeat it 3 times, and the tabla player hears it the first 2 times and then knows to play it 1 more time, and they'll be on 1 again. So it's kind of something that jazz players do. If you've ever heard that Miles Davis quote, it's like if you make a mistake, play it 2 more times and it's jazz. So that sort of comes from Indian classical music, actually, the T-high, which is a very intricate and fascinating rhythmic aspect. So if you ever get into it and you hear something played 3 times, you'll know that that's like something that they did on purpose. And so then they'll play this rhythmic cycle. It'll build in complexity and complication, and it eventually gets faster and faster until the rhythm, the beats per minute is up in the 400s, and it's getting very fast. That would be our rhythmic thing that we would be repeating over again, which is the. So that's like the main melody, the framework that you can come back to. And it's not anything pre-composed, I'm just making this up, but it sort of gives you an anchor of like, this is the rhythm, this is what we can go back to and know that we're playing something recognizable. the rhythm gets faster and faster, and the patterns get shorter and shorter until eventually at the end you have another version of the jala, which has the tabla going along with you, and it goes really fast for several minutes. Key high right there, so. So that's sort of how you would conclude a big long piece of Indian classical music, with a big, very fast. The RPMs are up in the 400s, and you would end on this big bang. So that's Indian classical. It was sort of my first other music that I got into. These other fellas came around later. I've been playing the sitar for almost, how old am I? It's been about 15 years now that I've been playing the sitar. The other instruments, I've had the tar. I got it back in March of this year. The oud I've been playing for 4 years now, something like that. Yeah. And the pipa I got at the same time as the oud, so 4 years again. So, I think it's almost done.
Let's see. It's 7:48. So.
Perfect. Well, good, because Chinese classical music is last on the list. So this instrument is called a pipa. It's not, the music itself is not related like these guys are. So these guys sort of bleed into each other, this modal, improvisational, rhythmically varying, systems of just making stuff up and trying to sound cool. Chinese music is very Western. It is all pre-composed. Everything is written out. You go to school to learn this music, and you play what's written on the sheet in front of you, and you get a slap in the face if you mess up. So it's in its own world. That's sort of the way it's been since very recently. There used to be a way of playing classical Chinese music as an improvised way, but they have given that up in order to modernize or become more appealable to European cultures, which I think is a huge disgrace, but that's a separate subject. So they sort of changed their whole approach to music, their own traditional music, and turned it into like our classical music. You have pieces that are hundreds of years old, you play them as they were written back then, you can add your own very subtle variations, but don't go being original, whatever you do. Or and that, it sort of has a cultural thing if you think about communism, but that's a whole tangent. I've talked to a professor of Chinese music, and he sort of confirmed that hunch that I had, and he was like, yeah, he's from China, and he went to school for it, and it's an expression of the sort of less focus on individuality, more focus on the common collective, and just sort of doing what has been done. So, China is a very different country, as you can quite imagine, just based on you know, the fact that they block YouTube and Facebook from their internet, things like that. So, you know, their music is all pre-composed, it's all very Western, everything is to the T, and you don't improvise on it really at all, ever. But I'm not Chinese, if you've noticed. And so I have sort of taken it upon myself to improvise on the bebop. But first I'll play one of their Chinese classical music pieces. And I'm not bashing them at all. It's beautiful. You know, their pieces are very beautiful. They're very old, sometimes very, very old, thousands of years old. And I think it's really cool. But you know, these instruments and their traditions have very old compositions as well. But they also let you sort of take some artistic liberty and express your individuality and sort of develop your own style, whereas Chinese classical music does not. So I just kind of think that that's a waste and sad. So I'm doing it because it's not something that I've ever heard. I've looked online, you know, I've Googled pipa improvisation and nothing really came up. Or, you know, I've tried to find Chinese classical music improvisational system. Apparently this was just banished from history and it just doesn't exist. So I was very, you know, I didn't expect that. I figured that, you know, India, Persia, China, Arab cultures have all been in contact with each other and they all sort of share this improvisational attitude towards music. And, you know, China's sort of way far away from everything, so I guess they had their own path, which is fun. But you know, I like improvisational music. I think it's a lot more fun. I think it turns music into play, whereas you know, reciting this perfect thing is work to me. So I was very stubborn when I was taking classical guitar lessons. My teacher was very much like by the books and quickly figured out that I was a punk and was like, you need to stop thinking about improv because it's not happening. So here's a piece of Chinese classical music that is, you know, I'm playing something that I have memorized, and so I'm thinking like, which part is next? I'm not thinking about, oh, this melody would sound cool if I did that. It's just, it's all been done before, so. I didn't really talk about the construction of the instrument. It's pretty simple. This is just a piece of rosewood with bamboo frets and a bamboo bridge and strings made of steel, wound with copper and bronze. The little lotus flower up here is porcelain. It's got 4 strings tuned to the tonic 4th, 5th octave. Same as the oud, actually. Just different notes. So you play with these picks on your fingers, which sort of give you the ability to move very quickly. It takes some practice. I should have warmed up before I played. But it's similar to a banjo. If you've ever seen a banjo player, they put their picks inside. And so they go in, with the pipa you go out. So you can get 5. Banjo players use 3. They do this, you know. But pipa, you have all 5 fingers at your disposal, so you can go very fast. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It almost sounds like more than one person hammering on a piano string or something. Okay, so here's a piece of Chinese classical music, pre-composed piece. How much should I play a short one?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll play a shorter one. recording over and over again. It's very sad sounding. You know, they use a pentatonic scale, so there's that's sort of classical Chinese style, you know, 5 notes. You wouldn't play like, you would never really do that in Chinese music, unless you were playing a different style on it. So that piece, you know, uses those notes, and you can tell the hint of the sitar where you bend the string to get these microtones. But the notes, the frets themselves perfectly align with like a guitar or something. So you could play really any song, any Western song on this instrument, as long as it was in the key that it's tuned to. It'd be hard to transpose these open strings. So that's the pipa, short intro to Chinese classical music. There's this instrument is, that piece is very subtle and quiet and graceful. There's also many very virtuosic and sort of dissonant sounding pieces that use a lot of weird sort of techniques, like crossing the strings over, that kind of thing, or playing this kind of thing, and this kind of thing, and this kind of thing. There's lots of weird sounds you can make. You can make a sort of cat. Lots of different sound effects you can make on this, and there are plenty of pieces that employ those strange sound effects. Usually the older pieces are like that, where it's sort of just like play the melody, you know, don't really freak people out with your crazy sewing machine sound. But it sounds cool too, it's just a different way. You know, there's a cultural split in North and South China, so Beijing versus Hong Kong. Different styles, different landscapes, different everything really, so different ways of playing the pipa as well. That's it.
So do you all have any questions?
Yeah, please. Everybody understands everything.
Where'd you get all of them?
I got them all on the internet. So, I've been very active on online forums, internet music discussion forums that are sort of specialized in this sort of topic. So each instrument sort of has its own online message board that I sort of participate in. I've met a lot of people over the years, and each one, you know, I've sort of done research and found out, you know, because these instruments are, while they're pretty exotic, they're kind of well known in the Middle East and wherever they're from. So, you know, you can buy a guitar at Walmart, just, you know, and it would be the quality that you would expect. So I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to buy a Walmart pipa or anything. So I sort of met people and talked to them, and they made their recommendations and played the instruments for me, and, you know, helped me out in getting quality instruments.
So what inspired you to start playing Eastern music?
Well, I've been playing guitar since I was a kid, and sort of that whole behind-the-scenes philosophy about improvisation. I had been applying to jazz, but I don't know, I just kind of got tired of it. I got turned off by the academic nature of jazz and the whole, like, work aspect of it. So I decided to not work at all and just play, just have fun. And I got my first sitar after hearing the sitar on a program that NPR had running in my town that I was living in on Sunday nights, or it was Music of the World, and I was tuning in one night, and they were playing that, and it just sort of clicked, and I was like, oh my god, I love that, I have to do that. They're just making it up on the spot, that's what I need to do. So it was a sort of legit way to apply my lazy approach to music and get away with it.
How much time did you take learning, like, I guess, the theory of the different areas?
Yeah, I mean, when I first got an instrument, it was just figuring out how to produce the sound, you know, how to pick the string, how to fret it, how to hold it, what's the posture, you know. So watching videos really helped. figure that easy stuff out in the first few years, and then it's still, I mean, I still am figuring out the music theory part. I mean, it's not, there's no like completion goal, like you have figured out raga music. It's like, you never will, you just get along so well. But yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing process, and probably most of my time now is spent on that. Whereas in the first few years, I was like, how do you tune this thing? What have I done? But you know, once I got the basics figured out, I would just play along with recordings, and you know, people on the message boards are very open and knowledgeable, and so you know, if I had a question about like, well, turns out that the record company actually put the wrong name on the CD or something like that, you know, it was be confusing. So yeah, it's the bulk of my practice time now is figuring out these different theory aspects of the music. And yeah, they're all sort of related, but very different too. So the people you don't really have to figure out. You just play what they play. There's no theory behind it. You just, if you have a memory, just apply it to the song and play it. So that piece that I played on the pipa, you know, it's, if you played it side by side with the recording, it would be a one-to-one match, obviously, but it would be like, you could tell that it was the same song.
So, what are your favorite ways that these instruments have been incorporated into Western music?
Yeah. The sitar is probably the one that's been the most incorporated. These other instruments are kind of on their own. There's the oud goes really well in Mediterranean style guitar, like flamenco. There's many flamenco style guitar players will play with the oud. It sort of adds that melodic instrument. So the Spanish guitar is very like open strum. You've got your big chords and stuff, and the oud adds a nice like gives it that sort of vibe too. The sitar has been incorporated in lots of like electronic fusion style things. Back in the 60s, it was in the whole thing, whatever that was. The pipa and the tar haven't really, I've never heard them in a Western setting. It's only in this traditional Iranian and Chinese classical music. I think Incubus used the pipa on one of their songs, and that's about it. So, yeah, I listen to the old stuff, so I listen to people whose name I can't pronounce and that died 100 years ago, and it's a grainy recording done on a gramophone, like that's what really is on my iPod. But yeah.
So what are your like opportunities for performance look like?
It's all over the place. I mean, I've played at many different settings, so like art galleries have had me, I've played at the Hindu temple, I've played at weddings, I've played at multicultural organizations at the university. Yeah, I mean, I've played house concerts, played in bars before, which is my least favorite place to play. Really anywhere. I mean, it's sort of an interesting, unique thing, so it doesn't really have a home base where, like, if you're in a blues band, you play in a bar, that's your thing, you know. But my setting is a bit more diverse. Usually it'll be like at the Hindu temple, I play the sitar, obviously. I've played with the Confucius Institute, with the pipa. I've played the oud for Arabic food thing that we have here. I've played the tar for Iranian events, and sort of each instrument sort of has its home within its respective community, but all four of them together. I've played in academic places like this. I played like busking downtown, side of the street, you know, played at film festivals. I'm trying to think if there's any more weird places like that. But so it's kind of like classical music, you know, you'd want a quiet setting. You wouldn't want, you know, a lot of chatting and partying and moshing around, you know, you'd want to have like a quiet setting. But yeah, it can fit into lots of places. I've played in quite a different number of places, and they all kind of have that in common, except for the bars, of course. They're loud, not the best. Played at Cafe Berlin, which wasn't so bad because everybody was sort of sitting down and listening. But I also played in this bar in St. Louis where it was like a bar. And I was like, I didn't really know what I was getting into. But luckily I had my drummer with me and we were really loud, so it worked out. So yeah,
Anybody else have questions or any more?
have a favorite? Have one that was like stood out as being, you know, pleasurable to your particular year? Anybody?
The sitar sounded great. I really
I
like
mean,
that.
out of the
part
all, the
is,
sitar is my favorite. It's really its own world, and the others are just offshoots of it. I've been playing it, 15 years, and it's never been boring. It's got so many intricate little subtle sounds, and yeah, it's a lot of fun to play.
I just really like seeing them. You know, we've
They're
talked
very,
about them.
they're very cool to
and-
look at. I mean, on their own right, they would be very sculpturally, sort of
Yeah.
a mix between engineering, acoustic science, and art. So, yeah, they're very, very aesthetically pleasing to look at as well.
Mhm. And I really liked how you explained some of the theory, because I think it helps, and we've talked about some of that, but talking about it and,
Yeah, so
You're
I was kind
talking
of
about it while
wondering,
you're playing
so
it.
what have you learned in the class about these things that you've seen tonight? Any of that? Have you heard the word raga before?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, hopefully, our explanations match up. It's sort of a foggy topic. Like, how do you explain what a raga is? It's actually, the word means color in Sanskrit. So, trying to explain what a color is, it's like a hue. Use the same word. So, yeah, it's hard to explain. It's different from our world where you have pieces that are like baroque or romantic or whatever, but it's a bit more loose, a bit more open to interpretation. There's many different styles of playing, and to come up with one cohesive meaning that encompasses, millions of people, it's like, how, you can't really do that. You can just say it's improvised, kind of, I guess, maybe, if they're good. And, did you guys talk about these instruments as well? Or just-
we did, we
Okay.
talked about all of them. so
Great,
far.
that's awesome. Yeah, so there's other instruments that are sort of even further offshoots of these. Turkish instruments have those frets like the tar, and there's an instrument from Japan that is fretless like the oud, called the shamisen, which is sort of a blend between the sitar and the kipa, which maybe someday I'll get. Probably.
So is that your next purchase?
Yeah, I think so. I think that Japanese instrument and the Turkish instrument will be my next adventures. I still have a lot of work to do on these.
How expensive are they?
Depends, I mean, if you buy them from a luthier, like a Les Paul, would be, thousands, maybe $1,000, $1,200. But just like good guitar, you can get it for like $500. So it's the same. It's fully equivalent to our knowledge of instruments. If you buy really expensive ones, you're gonna get ripped off if it costs more than $2,000. So perhaps, there's that's sort of nothing should cost that much, even a guitar.
Yeah.
Just seems like the craftsmanship of all the instruments is so much
Yeah,
more.
yeah. But it's the American market is very appealing, so they're very happy to trade rupees to dollars and make a profit. My sitar was $900. It was it's from Calcutta, and it came through Seattle. Which there's a store in Seattle which a friend of mine runs called Rain City Music, where he goes to India, and I follow his travels on Instagram, so it's really cool. post pictures of these gourds, these rooms full of gourds, and it's really cool. Yeah, so. it's
So is
used
that
in
the-
process.
Did you buy that 15 years ago, or is this one you purchased since you started playing?
No, I bought this one about 7 years ago. So, yeah. I've had 3 different guitars, and
I'm sorry, so if you all need to go, you
Yeah.
can.
Great
But,
show.
we won't have class tomorrow morning.
okay.
Listen.
There you go. Yeah. The Pipa was the cheapest of them all. So it was, I got a student model, which, I mean, it's fine. I don't see what better could be done with it. I mean, it sounds good, you know, it stays in tune, the frets are in the right places. It was $200 from Shanghai. The Tar was a bit more expensive. It came from Dubai. It was $500, and the Oud was $400 from Cairo. So they were. I looked at them online. Like I said, I was talking to people on forums, and they were like, "I'm looking to buy one of these. You know, what do you got?" Like, "Oh, I got a friend. You know, they'll go down and take pictures, and it's very easy. You can buy them on eBay too. I would maybe advise against that because you don't know what you're gonna get. You know, and there's no guarantee and no face or name to put behind it. You know, so that's the way that I acquired them. It's cheaper than going over there. It's easier going over there. Less complicated politically. I mean, we can't go to Iran anyway, so I would have to get it somewhere else.
So was your like Western theory, like knowledge, really helpful when trying to relearn this type of theory from Eastern?
Not at all.
It's just like totally relearning a whole different
Yeah,
thing.
no, it's not at all. I guess the basic thing that I learned from my own, like, Western upbringing in music and my appreciation for jazz and classical music was just sort of the overarching goal of music, which was to express beauty, you know, and that was like, that's something that sort of carries over between the two. But as far as like actual music theory goes, it's a totally different world. I mean, our instruments are tuned differently. They're tuned, you know, A, 440 hertz. You tune to you divide the octave into 12 notes, and those are your notes. Whereas these are like, with the exception of the pipa, these are like tuned to the harmonic. So you tune it to what the actual fifth is. You don't actually just cut the octave in half. You tune it to like where the string harmonizes. So it's a different approach to music. It's a totally different way of thinking about music, and that's sort of what I wanted from the get-go. I was sort of like, I mean, not to say anything bad about our own classical music. It's beautiful, of course, you know, how can you deny it? But it's like, at a point, I'm just restless and I'm a punk, so I just had to do something else. So improv worked for me. Jazz is the closest thing that comes to this, where the basic thing you do is you have a theme that you start with that everybody knows, then you solo, which the solo is like kind of your time to do whatever you want, and you close on a well-known ending. So just that basic framework is the kind of a common theme between these musics and our music. It's really the blues is the closest thing, actually, because the blues also uses microtones. You know, if you play the guitar, you get those hound dog sounds. You know, those are microtones, and that's sort of the thing that these all have in common. And the blues are very like much the music of the people. You know, it's not very strict. You know, sort of you're given space to let your style come out. So yeah, and I started out as a blues player when I was, you know, 14 or something, you know, just messing around on a guitar, and that sort of set the stage because I was fascinated by the whole thing of solos. Like, what is a solo? Where does that come from? They play that was sort of started it when I was a kid. It was like, solos, yeah, solos. The whole point of the song is the solo. Why have a song if it's not going to have a solo in it? So this is sort of an extreme version of that.
Yeah.
It's just sort of how it's turned into over the past 20 years. Like a kid who likes guitar solos into someone who's like, I'll devote myself to an instrument that is fully a guitar solo. And it's sort of a way to, like I said, get away with that, because normally you wouldn't be able to do that. But with this, it's like, wow. And I'm just soloing, I'm just chilling. I don't have to worry about anything. Except with the peapod, it's like you have to play the thing right. It's the exception. Not really though, because it's like, it's so foreign that unless I have a crowd of Chinese people, they won't really, nobody would know if I was improvising or not. But there's a couple of Chinese people in town that are familiar with the music, and they'll see me playing, they'll be like, oh yeah, I know that song. I'm like, yeah, you should. But, you know, other times I'll just be improvising, they'll be like, oh, what song is that? I'm like, it's not really a song, I'm just making it up. So, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Say, anybody else? Any questions?
Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it ties in with your material in class.
It really, I think it linked, even for me, so many things together that we've been talking about, that I really appreciate you coming in and taking
Well,
the
great.
time.
Yeah, it's great. This is my thing. You know, this is what I do. So
I'll probably be calling you every year, just so you know.
please do. Yeah, please do. You see me around. I think there's